Okay, guys, well, today we're going to talk about experimental methodology in English teaching and learning, methods, features, validity, issues, and embedded experimental design. We are Selena, Laura, Elisa, and Areli. Okay, so let's take a look at our roadmap. Today we will be reviewing a lot of factors. First, we will start with experimental design and some of the features it contains, manipulating independent variables, different types of role in quasi-experimental design, and methodological techniques, validity issues, threats to internal and external validity, ecological validity, and embedded experimental design. So a step beyond, sometimes it's kind of hard to step into the field of research, basically because, well, there are a lot of factors to consider: where to start, why, how to begin, and even how to hypothesize. For example, in the reading, they give us an example where preschool children who receive intensive instruction in sound categorization will be more likely to succeed in reading and spelling than those deprived of such instruction. Well, then how can we test that out and how can we make sure that that's true? Well, and that's where experimenting comes into play. So why do we do trials in the first place? It's kind of hard to even imagine ourselves stepping into the shoes of maybe scientists experimenting in a lab, but it is mentioned that it's actually the best method of establishing a cause and effect relationship to see what works, to see what doesn't. And well, basically, it enables us to go beyond where we are in our classrooms and step into descriptive research and seek explanations for things that are happening to our own students. And then we have to focus specifically on variables. They give examples of 3 variables that can impact experiments in language teaching. For example, by a presence or absence technique. What this basically means is that when you're carrying out an experiment, you have to have 2 controls, one controlled group and one experimental group, so that you can compare and contrast the differences of the results of each. Then the second way it mentions is to manipulate the amount of administration. So let's say that you have 2 groups and both of them are being experimented on, but one receives a different type of modification to the experiment than the other. And then a third way is to manipulate the independent variable by varying the type of instructional techniques used. So this basically means that, well, you could have even up to 3 groups, one that is modified to some degree, the second group that is modified as well, and then finally the third one, which has more modification than the first 2. And it gets a little bit more entailing as we go along, but hopefully we can provide some clear examples. And well, I related a lot of this information to Grey's Anatomy because, well, they had experimental trials there when Meredith Grey and Dr. Shepard were working on, well, this is how I can recall it better. On experimental trials, they had placebo effects and patients who would receive the actual treatment. And I kind of link it towards the same thing because, well, we have a controlled group who is receiving the adequate diagnosis, and then we have the other group, which is controlled. So Selena's going to talk to you a little bit more about these randomized groups.
Hello. Today I'm going to be talking about the role of randomized controlled trials, or RCTs if you want to make it short. And we will also be talking about the quasi-experimental. So the role of randomized, well, is basically a study design that randomly assigns participants into an experimental group or a control group. As the study is conducted, the only expected difference between the control and experimental groups is a randomized controlled trial. Is the outcome, well, the outcome is the only variable that is being studied. As you can see there, like in in the image where it says classical design of randomized experiments, uh, you can see that there it says like A1, B1, that those are the pre-intervention data collection points, and then A2 and B2 that are the post-intervention data collection points. So as you can see, there is an intervention group and a control group, and then there's A1 and B1. But between those, there is a randomization. That means that one group, the experimental group, receives the intervention being assessed, while the other, usually called the control group, receives an alternative treatment. So this type of randomized role measures what works or not in practice and evaluating the efficacy of interventions. So um, in this part, the primary function of RCTs is that they provide a good chance that for each person who will respond to being an experimental subject in a particular way in one group, there will be a matching person in the other group. So what does this mean? That all the for this kind of study, they're going to put like these random subjects in different groups, and then they're going to see the outcome at the end. So there it's like mm, let me give you an example. We put some people in group A and some other people in group B. Some are going to receive some type of information and the other is going to receive another type of information, and then at the end they're going to have different outcomes and they're going to be able to discuss their results. So it is also mentioned that RCTs are not like so beneficial for educational terms because uh, it could have like many type of variants. Like it has different probabilities. So in quasi-experimental design and other methodological techniques, uh, as you can see, there is like this type of same image, and the only difference here is that it says non-random assignments to groups. That means that here they get to choose what type of study, what type of population is going to be done in the research. So this time they're not going to be randomized. So basically, the non-equivalent groups design, you hypothesize that a new after-school program will lead to higher grades. This is an example that I wanted to give you. I hope it's comprehensible. You choose two similar groups of children who attend different schools, one of which implements the new program while the other does not. So this involves the manipulation of an independent variable without the random assignment of participants to conditions or other conditions. So right now we're going to be watching a video and then I'm going to be giving you more differences between quasi-experimental and the RCT, if it's still not comprehensible.
A quasi-experiment is designed a lot like a true experiment, except that in the quasi-experimental design, the participants are not randomly assigned to experimental groups. In a true experiment, research participants have an equal chance of being assigned to any condition of the independent variable, the one being manipulated by the researcher, that is involved in the study. So, for instance, if a researcher was examining the effects of caffeine on reading comprehension, she might randomly assign participants to one of three independent variable conditions: those who drink 1 cup of soda, 2 cups of soda, or no soda. She might then assess each person's reading comprehension abilities following exposure to the independent variable. In a true experiment, each participant who volunteered would have an equal chance of being assigned to any of the three groups. Quasi-experiments are employed when the researcher is interested in independent variables that cannot be randomly assigned. Usually this happens when the independent variable in question is something that is an innate characteristic of the participants involved. Let's look at a couple of examples to help illustrate the point. Here are two examples of simple quasi-experimental designs that will help you see the difference between a true experiment and a quasi-experiment. Dr. Jones is a personality expert who studies the impact that personality traits have on intelligence. For the purposes of her current research project, she is interested in examining the IQ scores of people who score highly in each of the Big Five personality factors. Each of the 5 personality factors are a quasi-independent variable. Personality traits are inherent to each person, so random assignment cannot be used. Participants would initially be assigned to groups based on their personality assessment score across each of the 5 personality factors. Now that Dr. Jones has her participant group assignments, she can examine the impact that personality factors may have on intelligence. If a true experimental design were used, each participant would be randomly assigned to each personality group, regardless of whether or not they possess those personality traits, which would not really address the question that Dr. Jones is asking.
Okay, so we have some advantages of the RCTs that would be good randomization and easier to blind mask than observational studies. Results can be analyzed with well-known statistical tools. Populations of participating individuals are clearly identified. So there is more control for bias. And then for the quasi-experiment, the greatest advantages would be that they are less expensive and require fewer sources. If we go to the next slide, we will see an image where we can do this contrast of quasi-experimental and experimental RCT. So while a well-designed RCT is the most rigorous method, RCTs are not always well-designed and they are not always feasible. In fact, a strong quasi-experimental design may produce the most rigorous evidence available for a given program and the greatest value for practitioners and policy markers. It is also very important to choose the right method of evaluation for the program and population of interest. So if you can see here, it says that quasi-experimental has more of a control for bias, and an experimental RCT would measure the outcomes for both groups. And I guess that would be all.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about validity issues and experimentation in language classrooms. So, going to the next slide, we see that validity of the experiment is one of the most essential issues to be critically evaluated. Now, in this area, there is 3 main parts. That is threats to internal validity, external validity, ecological validity, and natural experiment. First, I'm going to explain internal validity. If we go to the next slide, we can see that there is this quote that says, inferences about whether observed covariation between A and B reflects a causal relationship from A to B in the form in which the variables were manipulated or measured. Now, this is very convoluted, but a better way to explain it would be that they mean the correctness and precision of inferences drawn from the research and aiming for the ability to interpret differences in study outcomes as causal effects. So then we see some issues. First issue that I'm going to talk about is history. Now this refers to historical events that take place during the course of a study. This could be an unusually influential event that may coincide with the phase of the project, which threatens the validity of a study. This could be something that happens to one of the participants that affects the way they react or a way they learn something that relates to the study. So next we have maturation, which is the physical or cognitive changes that may occur to the participants during the course of a study. This is especially difficult with children. In the case of single case studies, maturation could mess with the data of the study. Next, we have selection. This is regarding to pre-existing differences between the experimental and control groups. This is not a concern in single case experiments, given that the comparisons are done within and not between each group, but it could still be an issue with other types of experiments. Next, we have the selection maturation interaction. These are biases, and selection biases and maturation processes may interact with each other in unexpected ways. In this further reading, we are given the example of gifted children assigned to a treatment, and compared to the control group, can show a higher level of improvement due to their talents and maturation. But that's because of their talents, and could be that it's not because of the treatment they are receiving in the experiment. Next, we have testing. This is familiarity with a given topic or aspect could be the reason for improvements. So when a given behavior or ability is tested multiple times, it could affect the performance of the participants and spoil the data. In this case, if the participants have been pre-tested and then gone through part of the study, they may do better in the post-study because they are trying to do better to either match the what expectations from the researchers. So that could be very bad for gathering data. Next, we have diffusion or imitation of treatments. This is information about the treatment that may be disclosed between participants of the control group and experimental group. Well, as it says, the participants of the experimental groups could reveal information about the treatment to participants in the control group. Going from what Selena mentioned earlier, this could greatly impact the results of the study since both of them are receiving different information. And finally, we have mortality, which is loss of participants during the experiment. Now, don't worry, this doesn't mean the participants have passed away, but rather that they have dropped out of the experiment, which is a big threat to validity because in most cases, participants that leave a group have reasons to do so. The next area I'm going to talk about is threats to external validity. If we go to the next slide, you can see that it is concerned with the extent to which the findings of a study can be generalized across different populations and contexts. This means that whether or not the relationship between cause and effect can vary in persons, settings, treatments, variables, and measurement variables. So let's see. We have first the interaction of selection and treatment, which is confidence that the study's findings can be generalizable to other learner groups. This talking about would all students of the same age and nationality learn English at the same pace regardless of where they study? Of course not. It can be completely different for learners in even the same classroom. So then how do we fix that? Yes. So